welcome to the Zoom call today. We're going to be addressing the presidential primary situation right now. I'm asking people stay on mute unless they are a state committee member or one of the people kind of scheduled to kind of talk about the proposal for now, but we will take questions after we go through the material. I'm Shane Trejo, the executive director of the Grand New Party PAC. Happy to have you on. We have people kind of slotting in right now, going up by the second. Should have as many as 150 tonight. We already have 50 on. So let's introduce ourselves. Those who are going to be leading the discussion tonight. So John Smith, want to introduce yourself?
Hey, John Smith, the Congressional District Chair.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on, John. And we have Dr. Steele on. So you want to just introduce yourself real quick?
Rob Steele, RNC Committeeman. Got all the rule stuff here tonight.
Awesome. Welcome on. Dennis, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks, Shane. Yes, Dennis Marburger, State Committee member from the 11th Congressional District.
Awesome. I'm asking you to unmute, Hima.
Hi, this is Hima, 6th District Chair.
Awesome. Thanks for appearing today, Hima. Adam D'Angeli, I believe, has just arrived, so introduce yourself.
Hey, Shane. It's Adam D'Angeli, Executive Director of the Washington County GOP. Awesome.
Glad to have you on. Also, Adam is part of Rescue Michigan, and he kind of got the ball rolling on the idea of scrapping the primary completely, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. Dan Lawless.
Hi, Daniel Lawless. I'm a state committeeman from the 6th District.
Awesome. So I think we might have some others from who are on state committee who I'm not aware of on here as well. Thank you for attending. Feel free to just raise your hand and I can acknowledge you guys if you're on state committee as well and I missed you. This will be recorded for the future. So if in case you want to get the word out to other people with regards to this or check on the information later, please feel free to do so. And without further ado, I'm going to get into a little bit of background on kind of what's going on here with the presidential primary. One of the things, I'm going to share my screen right now so you can see what I wrote with regards to the presidential primary and what can be done. So this is potential for a caucus system for the Republican presidential delegate appointment. With what has happened with the Democrats changing the rules, moving up the primary, we could lose up to 85% of our presidential delegates. Dr. Steele will be talking about that potential and going through information with regards to that later. So with that, I've proposed, Grand New Party has proposed the presidential candidate election rules that will operate similar to caucuses that go on in Nevada and Iowa. So that is available up on the Grand New Party website, gnppac.com, on our news page. So you can check that out there. We also have a think tank. I know many of you guys are in that already, kind of discussing the rules, the viability of the rules, how to make this as inclusive as possible and make this work as smoothly as possible. Oh, and Tim Brown, I believe he's on the state committee as well. So introduce yourself, Tim.
Tim Brown, 12th District.
Thank you for appearing, Tim. We appreciate it. All right. So excellent. So I'm going to get into Rob Steele and what he has to say next. So I'm going to stop the sharing of my screen and allow you to share your screen, Rob, so you can go through some information directly from the RNC. So I'm going to make you host right now.
I see Rob Steele's screen. I don't hear Rob.
Oh, there we go. Sorry. Yeah. So what I have up there now is the preliminary delegate allocation for Michigan. This is what's current, absent. This is what we're maximally allowed. I just had another call with RNC Legal yesterday, and we actually get 3 more than I thought. We're allotted 10 delegates for being a state. We get 3 RNC members. We get 3 for each congressional district for 39, but we do actually get a couple of bonus seats for the congressional delegation and the GOP majority in the House and Senate, because we actually had that for a couple of months after the 2020 election. So those 3 months between November and January, or 2 months, that actually still gets us those 3 delegates. You can see the alternates are 3 less. The RNC members do not get alternate.
And Rob, is this, with us being penalized, or
No, this is what we can have maximally. This is our delegated amount. And I'm trying to get to now another screen. All my controls for Zoom have moved up to the top. Does somebody know how to move those around?
I think you can just grab them and kind of move them to the
Yeah.
left or something like that?
Yeah, no, I got it.
Okay, good.
Okay, so let's just go quickly through, the actual rules. Can you see this? Okay, delegate counts, we just went through that.
Yep, we can
It's
see.
a little cropped on the left side, but we basically
Yeah,
see it.
I'm moving her here. How about that? Okay, so we just went through the state delegate counts, and then we just went through this as well. We get 3 per district for 3 times 13, 39, our 3, plus we get 3 bonus plus 10 for being a state. That's our base. And then our alternates are 52, the 55 minus. Going through this again. This does just show where some of the bonus come from. And in the past election, 2020, we got a lot more because, for example, we got votes for having had Trump in 2016 and that sort of thing. So we had 70 some delegates at the last convention. Okay, so here's the crux of what everybody's talking about. We can have the direct election. That's what we've traditionally had in a big primary vote, and then the state party makes rules that allocate those delegates to the primary candidates based on our own rules. They can be proportional, and we'll cover that, or winner take all, depending on when the date is. We can have state or congressional district conventions, and then we can make up some other thing that some other states are doing some different things where the campaigns actually submit a slate to the Secretary of State, and then all these people are listed. Let's say in our case we have as an example, if we had 100 people submit their names, then the campaigns would pick among those 100 people. We've never done quite anything like that. And so delegates and alternates are selected in the same manner. So the main things we've usually had is the primary, and then we're discussing the various district conventions. Now, one of the key things about all of this is here are the dates that are important. Starting March 15th, a state can be winner take all. It's not mandatory. They can continue to do proportional after March 15th. At March 15th, a state is allowed to say, a candidate gets 51% of the votes in whatever methodology, they get 100% of the delegates. If they're between March 1st and March 15th, then it's proportional. And then these proportional thresholds, these are determined by us, the state party rules. So to give winner take all, you have to get at least 50%. For proportional here, you can't require candidate to get more than 20%. So Last time we had 15% in Michigan. So, but you can't make it, you need to get 40% to get any delegates. The highest that number can be in a proportional system is 20, but it can be less. It could be 10%, it could be 15. It could include whatever number you want. And then in our packet, which I'm going to cover again real quickly coming up, you know, how leftover numbers are, you know, say we have 10 candidates, only 3 qualify. There's a whole bunch of votes that people got who had less than the threshold. How do you apportion those delegates into the various candidates that we have to put in? And so binding, the RNC rule is for the first ballot only. Delegates who are at the National Convention on the first ballot at the National Convention, they're bound to who they're committed to. That's done through our state party in various methods. In the past, it's been by congressional district. And so this is, of course, different than the idea of who gets which presidential candidate gets the delegates. This is more which delegates are then assigned to which candidates. For example, we had a time when, you know, Kasich was receiving delegates, and so the competition to be representing Kasich wasn't as great as the competition to be representing Trump as a example. Now, theoretically, our state could say, well, you're bound for more than one, but the RNC requires a minimum of the first. So here's a couple of the key things.
Hey, Rob, if I could ask a brief question.
Please. Yeah.
Are the at-large delegates bound, or is that the state
All
committee's
delegates.
decision?
First ballot, all delegates.
Okay, well, the district delegates are bound by the results of the congressional district. Is that not still the case?
Well, then that is correct.
Okay.
But all delegates would be bound to whichever candidate they're assigned at the beginning. And I'm just looking for some reason the initial filing date hasn't popped up here. Let me.
So is it the case that district delegates are bound by the district results and the state delegates are bound by the state results?
Well, that's the state could decide. I mean, you know, decide how the at-large people are done. In the past, they're assigned. You know, they volunteer basically, and then they're submitted as a slate to the Credentials Committee, and then the Credentials Committee in 2016-20 was the methodology to do it in that. Here's one of the key dates, and I'm going to back up again. By October 1st, whichever method we choose, we have to have our complete packet submitted to the RNC by October 1st, saying what method we're using to assign delegate count to the presidential candidates. We have to say what we're doing for the binding. We have to say how they're going to be pledged to which candidate. And if we don't turn it in, then we revert to whatever was used previous. But October 1st is the first deadline, and that's key because it's possible that under the new potential system from the Democrats who want to move it before March 1st, that we would be penalized. But we won't know if that's happening, though most state reps believe that this is an automatic and that they will just call an official end to the legislative calendar and then reconvene later. So we'll have to assume, I think, at this point that we're going to be penalized. But the bottom line is we may not know if we're penalized until after we've already submitted our packet to the RNC.
And Rob, is there any chance that the RNC would choose not to penalize us? Because it's, I mean, after all, it was Whitmer and the Democrats who did this kind of bamboozled. Is there any chance that they would waive the penalty?
Yeah, great question. And I'm sorry I didn't cover that first. The very short answer is no. The RNC can't change the rules. You remember in Michigan, prior to the last convention, some rules were changed leading into the convention. That made a lot of people unhappy. And in the RNC, that's not possible. And for the RNC to make sure that there's no question that everybody running for president knows exactly what the rules are, and what rules they're playing under. The RNC rules are frozen starting the 2nd September prior to the National Convention. So September 2022, last September, the RNC rules are completely frozen. The RNC members cannot change the rules. So the only way for the rules to be changed at this point, the next opportunity to change the rules will be at the National Convention by the Rules Committee with recommendations forwarded on to the national delegates as a whole. Now, the last 2 times we were penalized, we weren't given any break. We were penalized. Though on the upside, you know, we've obviously, since we don't know whether we're penalized, we're still submitting 55 delegates no matter what. If we're penalized, it just may be that the Committee on Contests and the Credentials Committee for the convention only allows the number we're allowed after the penalty. But all of those that were penalized, they were still allowed down onto the floor into the Michigan delegation as if they were a voting delegate. They were a guest delegate and had all the same access and pass to go everywhere the voting member did. But here's the penalties. We're greater than 30 delegates, so we would get nine members plus 3. So we would get 12 delegates. So we would go from 55 down to 12 delegates. That would be the penalty applied by the current rules unless changed by the National Convention. Now, I've already talked to, you know, a bunch of members on the exec and legal and all that saying, hey, you know, it wasn't our fault. Can we at least get together some kind of a resolution to say, you know, hey, National Convention, cut them a break, give them their votes back kind of thing. But that's without power on our end, you know, on the RNC, actual RNC. So alternates go down as well. Now, delegate eligibility, that's all pretty standard, got to be a legal voter,
Hey, Rob,
that sort of thing.
Rob, John Smith here.
Yeah.
That's a big penalty.
Sure is, yeah.
Is that normal across the country? Do a lot of people get penalized for that?
Well, not that many states, you know, put themselves in the box to be penalized. The Republicans have put themselves into the box to be penalized twice in the last 20 years. And, we got this basic penalty. Now, these are rules that have basically been, this particular rule has been unchanged since at least 2016. I don't have the rules handy before that. But yeah, that's just the standard penalty. Obviously, they're, the favored nation status of Iowa, South Carolina, Nevada, and New Hampshire. This is part of the motivation to keep people from challenging their first in the country status, because you get this big penalty. Now, obviously, the bigger the state, the more the penalty. I mean, if you only had 15 delegates, you would get penalized down to 6. Whereas we have, call it 52 delegates, non-RNC members, and so those 52 get penalized to 9. So small states, the penalty is relatively less, frankly. But when it comes to the presidential primary, the small states in terms of delegate count are less well. So that's how things are there.
Say, Rob.
Yeah.
Shane just said I should butt in.
Yeah, Bill.
This is Bill, 11th District Chair.
There you go.
If you're going to get to it in a second, or if you're not, please comment. How will the 9 be selected? Because that's not even one per district. Is there a road to pick
I'm
9?
assuming that we know we're going to be penalized, that the state party among the delegates would determine. I know in the past some people had volunteered to be the penalized delegate, to not have the vote. I know Norm has been through this and been through a couple of penalized delegations, and he said, for example, in the last one, he just said, well, I won't vote, I'll take the penalty. And as I mentioned in that case, you know, he still had a pass where he went down and sat on the floor with the Michigan delegation. But obviously people, you know, that may come to a vote or volunteer and choosing among themselves, I think definitely a possibility.
And Rob, so it's ultimately going to come down to the policy committee and the recommendations that they make per Christina Caramo. They're kind of leading the way on this at state committee. I don't know if there's anyone from the policy committee on. I don't think there is, but they're leading the way on this. So ultimately, the state committee would have to decide whether they're going to continue with the primary, or they would have to, or they're, you know, scrapping it and just doing it all at convention, or replacing with a caucus by October 1st of this year for it to take effect.
That's correct, and it's actually a very simple form. I have here's one from 2020. You can see that you know, we used a primary. This has the date. This talks about how the at-large delegates were selected, actually through the conventions, through a slate. So you know, it's forwarded to the credentials committee, as it noted, you know, down below here.
Hey, Rob, are all these links that you're showing, are they open for the public viewing?
I'll see what, certainly what I'm showing right here is the state party thing.
Whatever you could show to the public, if you could, or Shane, or one of you guys put it in the chat so our viewers can see what you're showing.
Well, you're not able to see the share of the screen?
Well, we might get people coming on. Well, I could see the link up above, but I mean, that's a lot to type, but it's much easier if it was highlighted and put into chat.
Yeah. So this is just the form sent in. So most of it's pretty simple, but then it gets into the you know, a bunch more. It goes on for 45 pages of how you handle proportional delegates and all that kind of stuff. And this is what the state party is responsible for by October 1st.
Dr. Rob, this
Yeah.
is Robin. I've got a question that I understand that you're using October 1st as the deadline. One of the things that I'm hearing that people are concerned about is that Whitmer could try to do another dirty deed in which when the legislature adjourns for summer, that she could actually call that the end of their session and they go on break. And then, yes, she could call them back in the fall, but use the term that it's a special session. And what I'm being told, what people are surmising from that is that if she ended the legislature's term when they go on break for summer, that would nullify the October 1st deadline. And we would already be in a place where we would have to be turning in our packets way sooner than originally intended.
Well, that part's not correct. The October 1st deadline is an RNC deadline.
So
this has nothing to do with the state party. It's the same deadline for every state in the country.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but I think we can have no doubt that they're going to call an end to the session and that we will be penalized and that the date for it will be moved forward. Now, I think one of the key things is that, you know, there are other deadlines that are happening behind the scenes when you have to turn in the names and all that kind of stuff. And that's when you're working through this process, you know, where we have our caucuses later on, where people run to say, hey, I volunteer for Kasich, or I want, you know, whatever they did last time. And so that's what's going on that. At the convention themselves, there's only 4 committees, and here they are: platform, credential, rules, permanent. They start the week prior to the convention, and people will volunteer to be on those. There's rules for filling vacancies for delegates. You know, there are deadlines to do that, and that can be done. You can't replace an RNC delegate. But one of the key things here, and so we've had one meeting in October, in Oklahoma. Christina, myself, Rana, RNC General Counsel, 2 of their staff members met to discuss, you know, our situation and potential ways around it. Or ways of being more creative, because I think one thing is key, and I've spoken with the major campaigns, they all have a campaign member who's their ballot access and delegate selection, a delegate person. And I've spoken with these for the major campaigns. And one of the key things is I think we have to keep in mind distinguishing between the beauty contest. Let me refer to it as the beauty contest of the primary. Let's ignore the delegate selection situation right now. Let's just, whether the beauty contest is February 27th or 8th, or whether we can get it. In fact, Eric Nesbitt, who I've got a call into, is trying to negotiate it to March 2nd. So that's ongoing too, but I don't have any details. But let's say the beauty contest is early. Regardless of the delegate attachment to the primary beauty contest, the major parties all want to have a highly publicized, totally public, big campaign beauty contest vote. They look at it as critical for their being competitive, keeping Michigan competitive for the general election. And the need to be able to identify our voters by having people show up at a beauty contest vote, pulling a Republican or Democrat ballot, so that we know who to go after in the general. So all the big campaigns agree on that 100%. They don't want to run into any situation where somehow we just say, well, we have nothing to do with it. We're not participating. That's not a relevant thing that they're desperately against. I mean, that would basically put Michigan out of the campaign because it would put us at such a disadvantage for the general. So the delegate end of it, what I've tried to discuss with the RNC legal team is if we can do some kind of combo thing. For example, you have the beauty contest, you put the at-large delegates with them, and you put all the congressional delegates into, the caucus situation. They've never really done that, so I've asked them to look through the legal ways of doing that, but I think we have to guard very, very much against this idea of publicly discussing over and over how we're doing something separate from the beauty contest with our delegates, because the articles are already written for the press to talk about us disenfranchising voters and ignoring the will of the voters. The Republicans are, keeping people away from their vote and all that. I mean, it's, so we have to be careful about that. So whatever is decided by the policy and then state committee, I think we have to be sensitive to how the press writes that up and do what we want, but just not have it be this on top of the press headline every day kind of.
It sounds like we're damn if we do, damn if we don't situation, Rob. Is that fair to say?
Well, I think the key thing is that whether the date of the primary is beauty contest, let's call it, because we haven't decided yet where our delegates are at. Regardless of the date of the beauty contest, the major campaigns don't want anything in the public about the idea that somehow we're ignoring the beauty contest. They want full force, full eyes, full press, full campaign on the beauty contest.
So no matter what,
they want as many people voting in the beauty contest, like any other quote primary in the past, so that they know who our voters are for the fall, so that we can identify who our most recent Republican voters are, so that we can go after those already identified voters.
So Rob, and let's say hypothetically, a state committee decides to scrap the primary for how the delegates are allocated. So would there still be a primary vote? Would people still be going to the polls, or would it be canceled entirely for Republicans?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I don't think there's any reason to cancel it. I mean, you know how it is. I mean, we have members on the state committee, we have members, our precinct delegates, we have members in the legislature. They have no idea how the delegates are attached. Right? The public certainly either. So I think the campaigns don't want any back off from the idea that we're turning out as many people to the polls on whichever date it is. Whether or not we decide to allocate the delegates differently, because the state's paying for the primary, the beauty contest. The state's paying for the beauty contest no matter what. So for our own strategy of identifying voters, we want as many people voting in that as possible, whether we decide to use that as the delegate allocation method or not.
So basically what you're saying is because we are in a state that has open primaries, we don't have any registered Republicans, that the people who show up and vote in these primaries that's like the best list of reliable Republicans that we can find, and that data is good for Republicans in general. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think President, they fully understand. The major campaigns are a little less worried about the so-called Rush Limbaugh Operation Chaos sort of concept of crossover, because now with, especially with Tim Scott, who's going to get votes, Trump and DeSantis, who are obviously going to get votes, there's going to be, it's going to be much harder for the Dems. Who are they going to say they're going to cross over to, quote, Curtis, right? And then especially if Kennedy's in the primary with the Dems, all of a sudden, the Dems are going to be much more like, the Operation Chaos concept is going to be much less applicable. So the presidential candidates are not worried about that at all. I mean, I know it's a theoretical concern for us, and particularly in other elections, far more than this one, I think. We've had problems with that. But they for the general election, they know how tough Michigan is, and they just want to make sure people are identified in the Republican ballot.
Hey, Rob, I have a question. Just to make sure I'm understanding, this is Daniel Wallace from District 6. Are you saying that if we had a non-binding beauty contest in February and then allocated delegates later on through either a caucus or internally somehow, we would not be penalized delegates?
Yeah, if we don't, you're right. If we allocate the delegates after March 1st through a caucus, then we're not penalized. The key is that there's no delegates attached to the primary, like the beauty contest. So, we theoretically could do both, and I'm trying to work out something with the RNC so that we get some delegates attached to the beauty contest, so that the press, at least we can hold them at bay a little bit. And I suggested the RNC League will look into, can we just do our congressional delegates, our 3 times 13 at the caucuses, because that's easy. I mean, we know we're going to caucus for those guys, and then let the proportional or the penalized group somehow. And this is where they've never done this. So they're trying to sort out what it is that could happen in this situation. Because if we said, well, we're not really giving them all at the beauty contest, I said, well, what if we do 50%? They said, well, that's too many, because then you're just trying to cheat your way around the penalty.
So is there any other state that does something similar, like a mixed caucus and primary, or would be
not really? No, that's why they're trying to what might. But they did say there are some new things. Some states are talking about doing this submission to Secretary of State, letting the winning campaigns get the delegates. As one of those has to be approved by the RNC candidate. And so we would now be falling into, if something like that happens and is agreeable to the state committee, then that would be some new method, which was back here somewhere. Any method consistent with RNC rule or method of Republican state committees choosing that we can get past the RNC basically in here. So it doesn't fit purely in here. So we're trying to do a combination of these, but they're touching it. I'm a little more worried about the press. We're getting beat up so much in the press. If we can attach anything to the beauty contest, then it holds them out a little bit. But regardless of what state committee decides, I think we should try to keep this to be an internal discussion as much as possible to keep the press from, saying the Republican racists are again disenfranchising voters by not.
Are we? Hey, Rob,
can I comment on all this, Shane?
Go ahead.
Yeah, Adam, jump in.
So a couple of points here. The first thing is this notion, which according to Rob, all the campaigns agree with, which to me only just shows the weaknesses of these campaigns. The media having a story to attack us with is the reason we can't do something. The bottom line is, the answer is simple. we are not going to let Democrats control how we pick our president. And secondly, right now, there is no reason to think that the polls are showing anything different than what the outcome of the primary will be. If that changes between now and next February, then there's no reason to think that our national delegates or our state delegates won't change accordingly. And the reality is, by the time the national convention rolls around, typically one candidate's already the presumptive nominee in the first place. So what the primary gets us by conceding to the Democrats' deadline is not just the loss of most of our delegates, which at that point, that moots the primary. I mean, if the concern is, well, and the idea that the primary is a beauty contest, well, you have plenty of beauty contests. They're called polls. And besides that, there's also the opinion of the state delegates. Now, conversely, if we don't have a primary that binds our national delegates, all the Republicans in Michigan are now free to vote in the Democrats' primary, which will put them in the same position that they tried to put us in. And now their choice is either they can face the media saying that they've canceled their primary, or they can invite Republicans to vote in the Democrats' primary. And I would also point out, any consultant who thinks we need the data from the primary to be how we determine how we target voters, that person should be fired immediately, because I have the voter files. I see the voter files. You can find literally voter after voter after voter after voter crossing over from one party to the other and back, from one side to the other and back, anytime the parties believe that their front runner is the nominee. Now, right now, if nothing changes with Joe Biden is the presumptive nominee for the Democrat Party. If some scandal forced them to stuff him into a locker, we can see exactly what's going to happen, because the Democrats control their primaries. They controlled the primary and put Joe Biden in South Carolina in 2020. They controlled their primary and got Hillary Clinton nominated in 2016. RFK Jr. has about as much chance as Tulsi Gabbard does. The Democrat Party controls their operations, they control their media, they control their party, and they control the outcome. So the odds that by February of next year, there's going to be any doubt who the Democrat nominee is going to be is silly. There's going to be Democrats crossing over to vote in Republicans' primaries. And if the presidential campaign consultants are relying on our primary voter data, rather than, there's all kinds of data sets you can buy. You can buy it from i360. You can buy it from Aristotle. You can buy from all these different companies that have, first of all of the electoral history from 2008, 2012, 2016, 2020. There's all kinds of data points they can purchase from all kinds of data brokers. If they're relying on the February primary results, where you have an open contest in the Republican Party, possibly, and if you don't, what's the point of having the primary at all? Or B, the Democrats not having a contested primary, the data's no good. It's not reliable. And to the extent that we say, oh, well, the mass media is going to say we're disenfranchising voters, just say, no, the Democrats did. The Democrats rigged the primary. The Democrats moved the primary early, and they were going to disenfranchise all of our national delegates. So that was their decision.
Adam,
they adjourned the legislature early to do it.
I don't care how it's done. I'm not staking a claim to what should be done. I'm not staking a claim to a personal opinion.
And by the way, I think, between the different choices, I think a caucus system, I think Washtenaw County and some other counties have the organization to pull that off, but caucuses are difficult, and they're new, and there's all kinds of ways that can go wrong. But all we got to do is say, look, number one, there's no reason to think that what happens in Michigan is going to be any different than what's going to happen in any other state. As the presidential race goes, whether it's Trump or if DeSantis comes up or some other candidate comes up, what makes Michigan special? What makes Michigan different? Nothing really. If DeSantis can build momentum in his campaign and be the nominee in Michigan, he would do the same in every other state. So all we do, if we allow the Democrats to control our primary, which I think, our state chair, our state committee members, Republicans have been talking about election integrity for years and years and years. We're going to allow Democrats to control how we choose our president and let them vote in our election. Versus we say, we're not going to let you steal our election. We trust our national delegates to honor the will of the people of Michigan, which will almost certainly be abundantly clear by the time the national convention occurs.
I think that's great. That's what the state committee is going to decide.
And I also don't think the media going after the GOP and saying they didn't allow the people of Michigan to vote in the presidential primary is going to be resonant by the time we have November 2024. That's going to be long since forgotten. And in all probability, people are going to look at the polls. They'll be consistent from one state to the other, to the other, to the other. And they're going to say, you know what? The precinct delegates voted the exact same way the public in Michigan would vote. Look at the polls today. Trump is ahead in the polls today. And, you know, and people are going to say, well, this process is all for Trumpsters. I'll tell you, Trump is not my first choice, but I can look at the polls and look at the reality. Trump's ahead in the polls and he's ahead in the precinct delegates. And if one changes, the other would probably change for the exact same reason. So we have a choice between screwing the Democrats over and putting it back on them that now they have a primary that they're stuck with that we get to vote in and they have to react accordingly, or we let them control us. So that's the way I see it. And if the campaigns are all saying we have to have a beauty contest, well, hire a pollster.
I think the key thing is they've made clear that they're not going to put their nose into how the delegates. They just want a beauty contest. You know, they want the ability to campaign to the public in a manner that will motivate people to vote and that they can make their point and know that they're committing media and dollars to the state. But they're not going to push any delegate selection process. That's up to the state committee and the policy committee's recommendation to the state committee and for them to vote. You know, I don't have a stake in that. You know, to me, it makes no difference.
Well, if we can evade the
penalty, if we want to not take a penalty, it's totally up to us to not take a penalty, and that's why they have different methods available to us.
If we simply send our national delegates all unbound and that gets us out of the penalty, then that's great.
But you can't send them unbound; they have to be bound for the first ballot. The RNC.
Okay, well, if we can't get out of the penalty, then there is no choice there.
No, we
the choice
can get
is
out
either
of the
we go with the
penalty
terms the
by
Democrats laid out for us, or we lose our delegates.
First, by disconnecting the delegates, from the beauty contest. The beauty contest occurs before February. The state committee decides to have a caucus on March 12th. Then we have a proportional system. The state committee decides to have a caucus after March 15th. Then we have a choice of proportional or winner-take-all system. That's up to the state committee. The fact that a beauty contest occurs on whatever date the state pays for a beauty contest does not bind us to using that beauty contest as the delegates. That's up to the state committee. And that's what we have to put down on our October 1st filing, like we had for Michigan's, when we check this box right here, where we say our method for our president is by caucus or convention. Doesn't mean that the beauty contest is concurrent.
Another thing to mention is that if there is, a beauty contest, as Rob puts it, before a caucus or before a convention and where the delegates are decided, it's very possible that the primary results could influence the caucus or convention.
Hey, by the way, speaking of that, Shane, I'm sorry. I'm noticing in chat, people are having confusion about what a caucus means versus a convention. So why don't you explain in more detail what you mean when you suggest a caucus process?
Okay, well, the caucus process is similar to what goes on in Iowa or Nevada or other states, where it would be, perhaps at the county level or even at the precinct level, where there would just be a group of Republicans. In the case of the rules that the Grand New Party has come up with, it'd be precinct delegates only. But again, it ultimately is determined by the state committee, where the individuals in this caucus would be on the floor. They would be, making the case for their preferred candidates. And at the end of the night, through different rounds of voting, and it's a little bit convoluted, they would come to the results of who would ultimately win that caucus. And then it would be divided up into delegates. And then the delegates would be chosen at state convention in a similar fashion to how state party leadership is elected there. So that's kind of the rundown of it, simplistic rundown of it and how it works. Whereas with the convention, if the convention model, it would be just the caucus would be scrapped, and it would ultimately just go to convention, where it would be completely up for grabs at convention as to how many delegates went to each candidate. They wouldn't be bound to the primary or the caucus.
So we're one of 14 states, I believe, that have an open primary. Do we know if any states or the history of any of the states that have recently switched from an open to a closed, so we could see kind of like their voter history?
No, but I do want to just play on what Adam and Shane said about the beauty contest could influence the caucus or convention. And those caucuses would be like congressional district, not county. You could write that into the rules if you wanted that to happen. That's part of the whole discussion with the RNC. You could have some sort of resolution passed by the state committee to say, well, we're gonna give the at-large quote delegates to the winners in the beauty contest at the convention. We're going to assign them after the deadline. That's how they're going to be allocated, some minority number of delegates, and then all the other ones be purely. If you wanted to do that, I'm just saying, right. If you wanted the primary to influence, you could write the rule or resolution up to have a multi-part step, and that's again up to the state committee. So it can get complicated, but you can work all these things in if that's what you wanted to do. I mean, it's going to be up to the policy committee and state committee to decide, what it is they want.
Rob. Hi, Rob. This is Dennis. Yeah.
Oh, hey, Dennis.
How you doing? All right. So Adam raised the point about unbound delegates. Do I understand that you're saying that unbound delegates are against the rules of the Republican National Committee or Party?
All delegates are bound on the first ballot only.
And they must
first
be bound.
Ballot occurs, then they can go anywhere they want.
Okay, so we may not by rules send unbound delegates. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. And then the other thing is, so I'm thinking back to 2 years ago, or 4 years ago, or what? I guess more than that, 2016. So what we did was people went to state convention, and said they were going to run to be elected as a delegate for one of 3 different candidates. And so it was decided in the congressional district caucuses of the Friday night of the state conventions. That was back in 2016. That's one possible thing we could do. And then the caucus that we're talking about is a different system. Do I understand that correctly?
Yeah, I think Shane was explaining it as a different one, but here what I have up on my screen now, results of the statewide presidential preference. Now that it says presidential preference vote, but that presidential preference vote is either the primary, the caucus, or the convention. It's not referring just to a primary. So on, first ballot, everybody's bound.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Rob, this is Bill again. It seems that we're way down in a rabbit hole in this, but it seems like it's the binding. The question on the binding is, when does the binding happen? If we tie the binding to the primary, we get penalized. If we don't tie it to the primary and do it some other time, we might not get penalized. But then you had this proposal of trying to tie some of the binding to the primary. That's where it gets really down a rabbit hole. I mean, isn't it simply, or at some level, it's when the binding happens is driving whether we get penalized or not?
That's correct. So, we can have a beauty contest and not be penalized if we don't use the beauty contest to allocate delegates. But RNC said, well, there's probably some ways you can write that if you chose to have the primary beauty contest influence a portion of the delegates, you could probably figure out a way to legally write that up and still do that. I don't know that there's any appetite for that necessarily, but we were just trying to come up with every different.
And that was sort of my follow-up question. Your proposal 5 minutes ago or 10 minutes ago was to say maybe the congressional districts, the 3 times 13, could be bound by the primary. But then I think I'm just following the bouncing ball. I think you also said that was too many because that's like 75% or 70% of all of our delegates that somebody at the RNC is going to say you can't do that.
No, it would be the reverse. I'm sorry if I misspoke, but I was just saying it's natural to have the 13 times 3 delegates be determined at a caucus or convention.
Okay,
Because
I thought
the
you
caucus or
said it
convention
the other way around. Maybe it's my hearing. So
Yeah.
if the 13 times 3 are at the caucus or convention, and the other, whatever the number is, 14 or
minority, yeah.
16,
Yeah.
if that's tied to the caucus, that might work. Okay, or to the primary.
Yeah,
Got
so
it.
who knows what the state committee will decide? I mean, obviously, you know, there's going to be people advocating all over the place, and I just, you know, want to try to make sure that we can try to cover whatever it is, because is with any group, you know, with 100 people on state committee, everybody's not just going to jump up and say, I agree 100% with this. Just assume there's going to be some negotiations, but you know, so I'm just trying to prepare RNC to help us with coming to a decision. If there is some kind of negotiation, everybody doesn't just jump up and agree on, you know, what the.
So I'm going to go through some questions in the chat right now. Jay Machad's asked, how can a delegate be bound if there is no primary and therefore no primary winner to which delegates could be bound?
Well, for that, I mean, you're binding the delegates at your caucus or convention.
Yeah, so wouldn't it be that the, you know, depending on the results of the caucus or the convention, whoever it is determined there that the delegate is supporting, they would be bound on the first ballot at RNC.
And of course, if it's a caucus or convention, then you still have to decide, if that's what state committee decides, when are you going to do that? Are you going to do that and potentially go winner take all after March 15th? Or
Jay,
between March 1st and March 15th to be proportional.
Mm-hmm. Jay also asked if the convention method were chosen, no Republican primary, would RNC rules require that to happen on the floor of the convention, or would it be able, or would congressional district meetings be able to elect some of the national convention delegates?
Completely up to the state party, not there. Our RNC rules on this are actually extremely long. Excuse me, state rules, MRP rules. You know, all of, you know, what would happen if it was a convention. I'm assuming what would happen is there'd be new rules written for that convention to answer all those questions and determine how the delegates were done. That would be up to the MRP, not.
I'm just looking at Ballotpedia here, and they note that all 29 of North Dakota's Republican delegates are unpledged. All 18 delegates from American Samoa and Guam are unpledged. Pennsylvania's 51 district level delegates are not bound to support any particular presidential candidate. It sounds like other states do allow national delegates to go unbound. I'm posting the link there if anyone wants to check that out.
Yeah, I'll ask legal about that. North Dakota is a history of running into trouble. They have one guy there in particular who's been a real rabble rouser on this unbound thing. He sends out regular emails to, I'm not sure exactly I get them, a guy named Hoglund. But
Rob, this is Jason from the 6th. I have a question that goes back to what Adam was saying earlier. If we do allow if a primary happens and we do allow that to influence the selection of delegates in any way, shape, or form, is it possible that we can write rules in such a way that we can determine how much of the Democrats actually crossed over to vote to try to influence our election?
you know, I'm not sure how you do that, but the MRP would be, you know, submitting something that would allow, if there was some influence of the beauty contest, to pick how that was, you know.
Yeah, just a quick comment on that. I mean, it's statistically very hard to tell. I mean, you can look at a voter file and see what people's presidential preference primary history is, but it doesn't prove anything about any one individual. It may be that they genuinely changed party affiliation, or it may be that they just wanted to interfere in the other person's primary. My experience in politics is that in an election where there is any race on the Democrat ballot where there is a contest, the Democrats will overwhelmingly stay in their own primary, even if the candidates are trying to get them not to. When they cross over is when they have a ballot that the entire Democrat side only has one candidate on it. In this election, there is only one race in the presidential primary, and that's the race for the presidential nominee. So theoretically, having RFK Jr. on the ballot could influence that. But if realistically, it's, remember, when Michigan would have even its early primary, there will already be South Carolina, there will already be other states that have voted. And, the whole name of the game in these contests is momentum. So if the Democrats don't perceive there's going to be an issue, and remember, the Democrats are absolutely obsessed with beating Republicans. They care more about that than they care about their own candidates. That's all they care about. So their inclination is going to be, I'm going to vote for whoever is going to cause the most trouble. And they're going to look at it and say, you know what, my vote's not going to matter voting on my ballot because Biden's going to win anyway. Or who knows, maybe Gavin Newsom's going to win anyway because he's the one that their party bosses chose for them. Because that's what they are. They're a cult. So the likelihood of them crossing over is just going to be off the charts. And that's the most likely scenario by far.
Mm-hmm.
And
so,
go on.
Sorry. Is there anything preventing us looking at those other primaries that went before us and trying to come up with some algorithm to say that, okay, in our primary, this is what our percentages were per candidate, and we're going to weight those according to the other primaries that have already happened and see how they were, how they won.
Well, you'd have no way to predict what the Democrats' voting behavior was if they were voting in our primary, for one thing. And secondly, you'd have no way to know who crossed over to be dirty versus who crossed over genuinely having a change of heart and party affiliation. So from the perspective of the campaigns that Rob was saying earlier that they want to use this data, the data would be no good.
Right. Yeah, I'm saying not looking at that data, but is there anything legally, I guess is what I'm saying, preventing us from looking at the results of other primaries, other states' primaries, and using that as a weighting system for our own primary results? If that has to.
At that point, we're not having an election anymore. We're just going with the flow with every other state, and that goes against the whole point of it. So you have the same criticisms you'd have anyway.
I had the rules up in front of me, the RNC rules, and there are two situations where a delegate can be unbound according to the rules. One is when your candidate withdraws. You've been elected to assigned to a delegate, your candidate is no longer a candidate, then you become unbound. The other place is where a state has the primary voters actually voting for the delegate. Bill would be on the ballot as a delegate. And the state goes out in the beauty contest, looks Bill to be a delegate, you can do whatever you want. They're not bound in that case. So those, according to the rules, those are the only two times you can be unbound. But if they're chosen in a primary caucus or state convention, bound for the first ballot.
So moving on to another question. Marcy Jankovic asked, how does a caucus exclude the public? And Bethany kind of gave a good response there that it would be only delegates voting. That's not necessarily the case. I know that, that's what I proposed in my rules that I wrote for a Grand New Party PAC. But at the same time, there's been other proposals of some sort of open registry process handled at the county level to give more people the ability to participate. And then devolving it to precinct by precinct basis from that point on. And that sounds good, but that would also add to make it more difficult for to actually pull this off with the resources. You might have to vet the people who try to sign up, make sure that they're not Democrats. And then, like Adam said, what if they voted Democrat their entire life, but then came on board the Republican Party when Trump showed up, and then you disenfranchise someone there. So there's a lot of potential hiccups that kind of come with opening up the process. Whereas if it's just precinct delegates, that it's going to be stronger conservatives who are going to be essentially governing the process. There's another question from Erin McGregor. She said, I'm tired of doing whatever just to placate the Dems. They will say whatever they want, no matter what. They will lie when it furthers their goal. So why don't we just do what's best for us? And I got a lot of thumbs up in the chat. So, I'm inclined to agree. I do think we need to have some sort of, ability or filter or understanding what the media is going to say, that needs to be a consideration. But at the same time, we shouldn't let that hold us back when we're looking at different ways to improve the process. And also, Patty Pozios asks, are South Carolina Republicans being penalized for Dems by for moving their primary to first? Rob, you can probably answer that.
No. In the RNC rules, this is a firm rule that these 4 states need to do whatever they want, pretty much, before March 1st. One can't go more than 30 days ahead of another. So these 4 states, from the Republicans, get to go first without penalty. And that's been, why Michigan was penalized, hey, we want to go earlier, and, we violated the rules and got penalized. So these 4 aren't getting penalized. Now, there's probably some discussions among them now, which one's going to go first, because there's not a rule about which one of these guys. So, maybe there'll be some jockeying to move around amongst these 4, but all without penalty.
And Rob, has there been any talk with Ronna McDaniel about this situation? Is there going to be any official guidance released by the RNC with regards to this, or is this kind of be more handled, behind the scenes?
Well, Ronna and Christina, myself, and the top legal counsel for the RNC plus 2 of their staff, we met on this, and Ronna obviously clearly understands that the rules are fixed and nothing can be changed except by the delegation. So, there's really nothing that anybody on the RNC can do other than try to help us come to whatever method our state works toward to feel is the best one for our situation. And, nobody's happy about being penalized. So, a lot of people will be looking for a method to get out of the penalty. And obviously Adam's going to be speaking, to his methods, and I'm sure other people on the state committee are going to be speaking of theirs.
Well, if, as Rob says, that just going straight to convention and not binding delegates is not an option, there's a lot of question marks around a caucus process, but there's a lot of potential for that being a huge way to attract voters to identify themselves to a party, making them come into a building and doing it that way. And to the people, someone asked a question about how much money would cost, but that could be a potentially big fundraising event. You get sponsor. It'd be a challenge for some of these parties, but getting sponsors, having people go around collecting contributions, all that kind of stuff that can happen. There's a lot of potential there, I think, and certainly you're going to identify a lot of serious Republicans if you have a caucus process and getting, everybody into a gym to organize. That's a huge way to get every Republican in a precinct to come out. So, yeah, it would be a challenge. It certainly would, but there's a big upside to it.
Yeah, and to that upside, you're right. It gives us a potential another avenue because the state's paying for the beauty contest. The legislature's paid is a lot of money and a date, and all the people they'll be paying for a beauty contest. So if you do a beauty contest and you do this thing where you set up another avenue to get a different group of voters in close, like Adam's talking about, maybe you're winning twice. I don't know.
And to be clear, the taxpayers are paying for that beauty contest.
Well, no, I get it.
What the state's doing is controlling the rules of the beauty contest is what they're doing. The Democrats get to control the rules. They get to administer the election. They control the timing of the election, and their voters are free to vote in that election if they want to.
Right. So. And we're the fraction of the fraction, and how this process works. Most people showing up at beauty contests have no idea other than saying, hey, I get to vote first time for Trump or whatever. So everything you say is absolutely true, Adam, and I agree with you. But most of the public doesn't have any notion of one word recession. So that's why separating the process.
Rob, most of the party doesn't know what's been said here today. Let's just Let's be honest. I mean, even a seasoned county chair doesn't know what you're saying. And be honest with you, we got a new state party. We got a new ideology that's in the party. We got 40% new delegates coming in. I mean, if we're going to make a change, there's already a lot of negativity around our grassroots leadership. I mean, I think this would be the time to do it if we're going to do it. I don't know if there's any states recently that has switched from an open to a closed primary, but we can get the pros and cons from those states if we could.
Yeah, John, this is Bill again. I'm not sure this is a question for you, Dr. Steele. Maybe it's for you, Shane. I'm not sure. But I tried to find my list of who's on the policy committee. I know my district's member is not on the call.
It's Andy Seabolt's the chair, District 2.
And that's not what I asked. I asked if there's anybody on the call that's on the committee. I said my district is not represented. But just the reality of the calendar, this is your point, John. I got a meeting in 2 weeks for the state committee.
Tim, are you on policy? I'm on the policy committee.
Great. Maybe Tim, you can comment a second, but in 2 weeks, I got a meeting, and then we don't have another scheduled meeting until after the October 1st deadline, because the next day committee meeting is, guess what, at Mackinac Island or wherever they're going to do the Mackinac conference. That meeting normally takes like 3 minutes because it's between cocktail parties. So this issue should be on the agenda for June 10th. So my question to Tim or anybody who knows where the party is like, what the hell is the party doing on this? And because the clock is definitely running, so I'll shut up.
So
I'm confused by the lack of communication.
Okay, so I have been kind of AWOL only because of my business is sucking up all my time. But the calls that I was in on, they are working on this. It's just that they haven't come to a conclusion. We were supposed to meet. We were supposed to have another Zoom meeting, but it hasn't come up yet. So the next one might be the one that tells us what's going to happen.
Yeah, I have the policy committee in front of me. It's Barden, Seabolt, Todd, Ball, Brown, Sterniak, Olahan, Shetron, Skibo, Beatty, Ostrich, Brown, and Constantino. That is our policy committee.
And we do have Oscar Barden on the call if she'd like to weigh in. I know I talked to Andy Seabolt about it, and and Dan Houlihan. I think they're the ones kind of taking the leadership position on it. I've provided them with everything that we've done in our Grand New Party study think tank Telegram group to study the rules and look into the information. So I provide as much supporting information as I could. We'll continue to provide more. Provide links to this video so that we can move quickly, but also make an informed decision, not just rushing. Coming to the best possible conclusion that we can to protect our delegates while not disenfranchising people and using the power that the grassroots has now over the state party really to improve the process.
Also to protect our party brand, Shane. Don't forget that's so important right now.
A quick comment about the timing too, by the way. Rob had mentioned, at any point the Democrats could adjourn, sign, die, as they call it. And I should explain this again because it's very confusing as to what this all means. The way it works in Lansing is that if a bill doesn't have immediate effect, it takes effect 90 days after the legislature adjourns for the year, which normally would be 90 days after the new year. And therefore, the Democrats' law they passed to move our primary up early wouldn't take effect until after the primary would have already happened. So the only way the Democrats can move the primary up earlier is if the legislature does something they've never done before, which is they pretend to adjourn for the year early. And then, of course, they later on reconvene a special session to go right back to what they were doing. Now, the reason I bring this up is because I think it's very unlikely they would do that except right before the summer recess that starts in mid-June. Because if they did it then, it's almost plausible. It's not really. But then after 2 months, the governor can say, okay, time for a special session. We've got more to do. But whereas if they adjourn in late October and then resume in November, it'll be undeniable, transparent, obvious that it was a ploy just to get all their bills to take effect early. So most likely we'll have a pretty good idea when they take their summer recess in mid-June, if they're going to pull the adjourning sign die trick play. So most likely we've got late June, July, August, September to sort this all out. So there is a time sensitive component to this, but it's not like this has to get done right away. It's not like it has to be done instantly. So we still have some time yet. Hope that makes sense.
Let me just
Well,
ask everybody.
agree,
I have a follow-up meeting.
I would.
Go ahead.
I agree with you, Adam. My concern is that the state committee that's going to be an important role on this discussion and decision only has one scheduled meeting basically between now and October. So we're tying into a special meeting of the state committee in the middle of summer, which is just dangerous because the next scheduled committee meeting is the Mac Island one or wherever that's going to be. Which if you've ever been to that, that's more of a pro forma meeting. They get together, they pound a gavel, they call it a meeting and they adjourn. So either we're going to turn the September meeting into a substantive meeting, or it better get done in June, or it's going to be a special meeting. I just, the clock is running. I know I'm preaching to the choir. It's the number one issue for everybody in my committee is this issue. And we can't get the policy committee to get off a dime. So Tim, please take the urgency back to them and just say, they've got to do something to communicate what's going on. It's the number one issue.
And we have Heath Wall wanting to ask a question. So Heath, feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question.
I was just going to ask, I have a follow-up meeting with RNC Legal. Are there specific questions that have been identified out of this conversation that you would like me to pose to RNC Legal?
Or we'll mull
Think
that
about
over.
that. I mean, it's going to be a few days before I meet with them again. You know, so feel free to forward them on to me if there are things that you think about that, you know, some side branch of something we talked about that we need to get cleared up.
If you have any questions for RNC Legal, forward them to me on the next day or so, and I'll make sure they get to Rob and they get asked. So Heath, you have your question?
Yeah, no, just another comment, just to kind of clarify a couple of things. The policy meeting, we are meeting. We have a meeting Thursday, and this is a high priority topic for us as well. We've been having a lot of communication the last couple of weeks, in particular around research and ideas that we have had. So we understand the brevity, the quickness of it, the obvious importance of it. So yes, please feel free if there's comments, questions, information, research, whatever it is that would help facilitate those discussions. But I just wanted to kind of just let everybody know this is something of a high priority and we are taking care of it as well.
Awesome. That is great to hear. And we have someone who is kind of asking, why we were penalized and why South Carolina wasn't. And that comes down to that South Carolina's rule change wasn't, or their changes in the process wasn't against RNC rules. Is that why, Rob?
Yeah, that's correct. They can be before March 1st.
Yep. So just wanted to confirm that. All right.
Yeah, it's just history, and it's actually a good policy because when you have a few key states that go early, it makes it so that campaigns can target a few states. It benefits the underdog campaigns. So the side that doesn't have $10 billion to campaign in all 50 states at once doesn't have that advantage. So that's why they do it that way. They're all small states. So, and they've just done that over the years. So that's just kind of what they stuck with.
Yeah, and these four, they can't be more than a month ahead. So they couldn't say, oh, well, we're going to do it December. Oh, we're going to do it the fall, whatever. They have to be within 30 days of the next. They can't leave by more than 30 days.
And Bethany asks, if we can't get it together as a party, how do we pull off funding and changing our structure to caucus? That's a good question. I mean, it may be outside of the current organizational bandwidth that the local parties have. A lot of new leadership, a lot of growing pains and having to learn on the job of how to do the functions of the local parties. That may be a reason why just do what Adam said and go to convention and just determine who the delegates are there. But at the same time, I do think that a caucus, the positives of it, the kind of the direct participation and the ability that kind of gives to the strong activists to be incentivized to get involved in the process. If it's controlled by the precinct delegates, that will incentivize people to want to sign up to become precinct delegates, to understand the position more, and create, I think, a stronger delegate base. And like Adam said, if they're getting involved in the caucus, if they're learning to organize on the floor, that's going to make them more adept organizers in different capacities beyond the caucus in years to come. So I think it's just a great learning experience for everyone. So I still, there might be some the caucus might have some problems, or some questions as to how it would get off the ground, but I definitely think it's worth doing.
Well, and I'd also say I think it's a challenge, and I think people rise to meet challenges and that benefits. I mean, I'm not going to badmouth Christina, but I'll just say, our county party is rapidly professionalizing, and people are getting more engaged very rapidly. And I think it's because, they see that they need to, and I mean, Christina might not have the fundraising prowess that past state parties have had, but you know what? I mean, historically, the norm is that the GOP is a welfare office for lazy consultants. And I think in the long run, it's going to benefit us. So, will there be issues within a caucus? Well, it will be difficult, but, Republicans have been talking about election integrity for years now. Let's see them prove it. Let's see them hold a fair election. Let's see them pull it off. And, they might even learn to be better fundraisers, frankly, if the point of it is they have to pay for the thing. So, it will be a challenge, but I think precinct delegates could use one.
Very well stated. And we have another question from Jay Mashoud for Dr. Steele. He asks, would you please clarify the bound, quote unquote, bound language for the first round of national convention voting? We select national convention delegates of the state convention vote. Those delegates would, by definition, not be bound. That is, we'd be voting for delegates, not for a presidential nominee. There'd be no guidance as to the candidates to which they would be bound. I think the problem with the understanding is that the convention, the delegates would be bound at the convention. And can you explain a little bit of how that might work, Rob?
Well, in that case, you might be able to do in one step what in the past has been two steps. Past the primary election, the beauty contest assigned the number of delegates to a candidate, but then the individuals assigned to those candidates happened at a later congressional caucus or convention, whatever you want to call it. And so that was at a later time under a different deadline. So I don't know. I mean, I'm just thinking out loud. Maybe that could all be done at once if it was at a state convention or a caucus, because you know who you're dealing with already. Whereas when you have a primary, you're not dealing with any individuals yet. You're only dealing with a number being assigned to a presidential candidate. But the bottom line is it doesn't make any difference how these individuals are done. And I'm just looking at the rules right here. By primary election, by the state committee, by state under congressional convention, or any other method agreeable to the RNC, they're bound for the first ballot.
And Hima says that we should stop worrying about being accused of disenfranchising voters, as the voter participation in the primaries has been historically low, around 17 to 20%. That's an interesting point. A lot of people just don't participate in primaries anyway.
Yeah, Shane, we're not disenfranchising voters. They have to get out and participate in order to vote. So it's not us disenfranchising. They're disenfranchising themselves by not participating.
Right. And he mentioned, I agree with all of that 100%. And the only reason I mentioned that is not because it's actually happening. But the Democrat media will say that's happened and will be part of their storyline and be part of ads later on and that kind of thing. But it's obviously not true. I agree.
No doubt. Do we have any more questions? All right. Well, I think we're about done today. I think we got a lot of interesting comments. A lot of. Well, we got one more question. Silver Fox asks, how do we assure equal, fair, adequate delegate choices for caucuses? I mean, it's going to be very decentralized. So it's, ultimately going to depend on, precinct by precinct or county by county, how each county governs the process at that level. So it's going to be decentralized. So ultimately, it'll come down to the delegates themselves and the leadership the delegates put in place as to how well it will be run.
Yeah, let's do it at the state level too. I just seen that Charlevoix. I agree. I mean, the more controlled if we're able to get that down, I know that this is far fetched, but if we can get at the state level politics, I think we will see more participation, more people be signing up to be a PD, to be involved in this situation.
Also caucuses don't have slates. Caucuses is like everybody for Trump going to that corner and everybody for DeSantis going to that corner, everybody for Vivek going to that corner, and then people be counted. That's what that typically goes.
Yeah, and in Iowa, there's two different ways that it's done for the Democrats. It's done in sort of the way that Adam describes, where people go on one side of the room, they go on the others. There's certain candidates are eliminated after different rounds of voting. There's a scrum for delegates and a lot of, talks on the floor to, form coalitions and stuff like that. That's how it's done for the Democrats in Iowa. For the Republicans, they pretty much just get together in a room and cast votes. So kind of like little mini primaries, and it's much more orderly. So those are two different methods that the state committee can ultimately determine on how to run a caucus. It would probably be easier to do it with just the people just submitting their votes and it being done in a decentralized manner. But I ultimately think in my proposal it's more like the way the Democrats do it in Iowa, where it is that kind of that scrum on the floor. That's what I've always felt the caucus was, is kind of the caucus in its purest form. And I think that's the kind of the way, the best way to organize and the best way to perform the caucus, in my opinion.
Yeah, you might have slating for like the conventions to elect delegates, but that happens separately later on for the county conventions. That's an entirely separate event.
And we got such a big spread right now, or so it's said. Why not do it while we're at a low time? Let's give it a shot.
And I could get a hold of, for policy committee or for a group like this, I mean, we could get RNC members on who have these different methods. I mean, obviously I know how to get a hold of them. They at least could relate their experience as to what happens by their methodology. Don't have a.
So
I mean, if we have a caucus, we get to check people's IDs when they vote. We get to confirm that. We get to hand them a party donation form as they check in if we want to. I mean, all that kind of stuff. We're playing by our rules, not by theirs.
Very well stated. Okay, so I in the chat I put a link to kind of I put a link to my proposed rules for how the caucus might be able to take place in the state of Michigan, and then kind of a broader description of the process and why we're considering these new rules and some of the different options. So feel free to check that out.
Put those RNC rules in there too. Why? So people can cross-reference that.
I'm not sure. I think it was just something that Rob had on his computer, like a saved file on his computer.
Gotcha.
But it'll definitely be archived in this video. This video will be posted on Rumble and on YouTube by tomorrow. So you'll be able to see all that information by then. And if Rob wants to send it over to me, I'd be happy to post it publicly.
Yeah, I'm just looking to make sure that I showed all of these at some point. I didn't show this one.
Okay, I'll make you host, and you can show all the other information that you haven't shown before we wrapped up. Okay, so 1 second.
let me know.
Okay, your host.
Okay, so October 1st, we went through that. June
Oh, you gotta
10th,
share. You gotta share the screen again.
Oh, I got it. Let's see where am I? Okay. Is that working?
I'm not seeing your screen.
Okay, sorry. No.
There we go.
Okay, so June 10th, this is where there have to be names attached to the numbers. Okay. These are the different convention committees. They meet a week prior to the a week prior to the convention. The convention's July, I don't know, like the 24th or something of 2024. How to fill vacancies. Contest, this is where people disagree about who, how, or why, or whoever was put in, and there might be, you know, just like there'd be a challenge at credentials. Think of this as kind of like credentials committee. Not exactly the same, but similar. Credentials committee. For example, if we're penalized, if it ends up state committee comes up with something and we get penalized, we would still submit our 55 people, but then you know, only X number would be and that looks like everything that so everything that I have has been somewhere on this event tonight.
Thank you, Rob, for being our national committee man and showing us this tonight.
Yeah. Well, thanks to all you guys. I mean, Shane, I know you know, put together your new PAC, and you know, Adam's always been a tiger on the mechanisms and on you know, the mechanistic methodologies of the party, the pressure points, and how the rules work, and it's great. I mean, we need all of this. You know, we can't, especially in a state like Michigan, where it's definitely not a red state. We got to have all hands on deck with every mechanism we can muster to get polls, and you know, you don't win the election. I mean, obviously, it's obvious to everybody in this call, but we lost the House and Senate by 1 seat. Look what's happened in 4 or 5 weeks. I mean, it's just incredible. State of Michigan.
You got to keep fighting, you know, no matter what the odds may look like. And that's what we're all here. It's what we're all doing. Thank you all for attending. I will have more information for you guys in the days to come. I'll have this video up on Rumble and YouTube. So stay informed, stay engaged, and we'll improve this process and improve our party and take back Michigan. Thank you, everybody.